Welcome back, folks, to WrestleRant, where I give my in-depth analysis of all the pay-per-views that I watched on the WWE Network. In the last week alone, I've watched the 2008, 2011, and 2013 installments of WWE SummerSlam, and they will all be reviewed in upcoming editions of WrestleRant. And that's going to probably run us through the end of August, going into September. I'm still unsure if I'm going to be reviewing some Unforgiven pay-per-views, maybe all the Night of Champions events. I'm not really sure yet. It depends on much time when I go back to school and stuff like that. But I'm already watching the '07 edition of Vengeance, Night of Champions as it is, so that will definitely be reviewed at some point in September. But nevertheless, today I'll be talking about the 2008 SummerSlam pay-per-view. Holds a special place in my heart as it was my first ever SummerSlam as a wrestling fan. Of course, I was not watching live at the time. If I recall exactly, it was on that day. I actually went to the beach or something, and at the time I had this text service from WWE that they text you all the results of all the matches, whether it be pay-per-views, Raws, ECW, SmackDowns, or whatever. They sent you a little text with whatever happened. So it actually came in handy as I was on my way home from whatever beach we were at that day. And I wasn't able to find out the full results of the show until I got home that night. So it kind of came in handy, and I remember just reacting to the news of Shawn Michaels almost retiring and MVP beating Jeff Hardy, and I just being so disappointed at being the mark that I was and am at the results, taking it to heart, so to speak. But anyway, we kick things off with the 2008 SummerSlam with MVP and Jeff Hardy. So like I said, at the 2008 Saturday Night's Main Event edition, that was a great feud that they had going. Jeff Hardy was over as all hell over the course of '08. And going into 2009 as well, they had a great feud going over the course of this summer. MVP going over clean during the course of this matchup, having a very good matchup to kick off the show. Much better than their Judgment Day matchup that they had a couple of months prior, which didn't really have any storyline behind it. Jeff Hardy and MVP actually had something going over the course of this feud over on the SmackDown brand, whereas their first matchup together at Judgment Day of that year really didn't have any meaning behind it. But a very well-wrestled matchup from Jeff Hardy and MVP. Like I said before, MVP took the clean victory after hitting the drive-by kick, which he didn't use much after this. He kind of debuted it as a finisher during this feud with Jeff Hardy, but he didn't really use it much from this point forward. But a nice victory for MVP that would prolong the Jeff Hardy win until either that Friday night on SmackDown or maybe the week after, but it was still really weird. They're kind of building up Jeff Hardy to be this underdog of a superstar, building him up and hyping him up and getting him ready for the WWE Championship run that he would have a couple of months later with Triple H. So to have him lose here was a bit odd, but he would get that win back, like I said before. On an episode of SmackDown a couple of weeks later, MVP would then go on to embark on a losing streak over the next couple of months before turning babyface. So up next, we had a intergender tag team matchup with Santino Marella and Beth Phoenix, collectively known as Glamorella, taking on the then Intercontinental Champion Kofi Kingston and then Women's Champion Mickie James. So before this was really something that was unprecedented for the WWE to put two titles on the line in one matchup, intergender matchup that is. It was an Adamle original, so to speak, made by the then Raw general manager Mike Adamle, still one of my favorite authority figures of all time for all the wrong reasons, but nevertheless, it was a fine enough matchup. The crowd didn't really have any reason to care. I mean, Santino was a comedy figure, a comic relief. Beth Phoenix was just kind of tied into the whole thing. Kofi Kingston and Mickie James had decent runs with their titles. It was time to take the titles off of them, respectively. So, Glamorella, I mean, in theory, like I said before, Beth Phoenix, a great wrestler, a great character overall. So to give the World Women's Championship back to her, that was fine. To give the IC Championship to Santino, it was kind of questionable at the time, but he would definitely make the most of it, and surprisingly enough, he would be one of the most memorable Intercontinental Champions in recent memory with the Honkometer, and that's what he would go on to do after winning this matchup. So, and I'm also glad they didn't take the route with giving the Women's Championship to Santino and the IC title to Beth Phoenix, much like they did with Chyna, a number of years ago during the Attitude Era. I'm glad they didn't take that route and hurt the prestige of both belts in the process, because as it would turn out, Santino would improve the importance of the IC Championship by beating Kofi Kingston for it here and holding on for it for a while and doing the Honkometer and actually engaging some interest from some fans. And then for the Women's Championship, Beth Phoenix would go on to hold this championship until January of 2009, where she would drop it to Melina at the Royal Rumble event. So, fine enough matchup here. The action was pretty forgettable, but the title changes were significant. Up next, before we get into the next matchup, we had a segment featuring Shawn Michaels and Chris Jericho. Now, going into the show, Shawn Michaels was advertising that he was going to be making this blockbuster decision that he was either going to be retiring from the ring, continuing his career. It was really all up in smoke, both legitimately and in storyline, because in storyline the month prior, Jericho had taken out Chris Jericho had taken out Shawn Michaels by targeting the eye and making him bleed profusely and stuff like that. And Shawn Michaels had been out of action ever since that point in time. And behind the scenes, Shawn Michaels, I think, there were plenty of rumors that he could be winding up his career, as Shawn Michaels had debuted almost exactly 6 years re-debuted in the ring from almost exactly 6 years removed from the 2002 SummerSlam event. And Shawn Michaels would end up winding down his career about a year and a half later in that feud with The Undertaker after WrestleMania 26. So he would get another year and a half out of his career, but nevertheless, though, there was a lot of questions and confusion surrounding Shawn Michaels at this point in time, and it really goes to that saying that his feud with Chris Jericho over the course of 2008 was one of the best things that WWE did over the course of 2008 and in recent memory. That feud was so freaking phenomenal. Both that and Edge and Undertaker over on the SmackDown brand, and I'll get to that in a little bit, were two of the very best feuds that WWE's had to offer in years, and they both were happening at the same time in '08. So that's one of the reasons why '08 is one of my favorite years as a wrestling fan. Due to the fact that there was so much going on at the time with Edge and Undertaker, Shawn Michaels and Chris Jericho having these two phenomenal feuds, and the fact that they were happening at the same time was quite a coincidence. But nevertheless, though, Shawn Michaels on the verge of announcing his retirement on the show. Out comes Chris Jericho, still using the countdown at the time, before I think he would do away with it a couple of weeks later, but saying that he wants Shawn Michaels, he doesn't want Shawn Michaels to credit the injuries, the ongoing injuries, the back injuries, as the means for his retirement. Jericho wanted Shawn Michaels to credit Jericho as being the one who ended the career of the Heartbreak Kid, Shawn Michaels. So Jericho says, I want you to go home, sit your kids down, sit your wife down, and say that Daddy can't wrestle anymore because of Chris Jericho. Shawn Michaels responds by saying, I may retire, I may be done in the ring, I may be doing this, that, or whatever he said, but he said, I want you, Chris, to sit your kids down, I want you to sit your wife down, and say that Daddy will never be the Heartbreak Kid, Shawn Michaels. And that was a great line from Michaels right there. Leads to Jericho knocking out, or attempting to knock out Shawn Michaels, but instead hitting his wife, Rebecca, legitimately in the mouth. Jericho has talked about this in the past in interviews, and he'll be going in depth about it in his new book coming out in October, which I'm very much looking forward to, because it's going to be talking about this feud and everything else that Jericho did during his second stint with the company, or at least I hope. But a lot of great stuff. I mean, he legitimately knocked out his wife. Not knocked her out, but he legitimately hit her right in the lip. And I always wondered that after this happened, that I, of course, knew it was fake when I got into watching wrestling. But I always wondered why, or if it was makeup or whatever, that they really made it that real to look like she was really hit in the mouth, because it was really swelling up after this. And, when they would show pictures of it on the subsequent weeks on Raw. And as it turns out, she was really hit, and she would be okay. It did hurt a lot from what Jericho has said in interviews and stuff like that, but a hell of an angle. These two continue to find ways to top one another over the course of 2008. Just another great installment of this epic feud. It would go on for another couple of months, leading to their unsanctioned matchup at Unforgiven, their ladder matchup over the World Heavyweight Championship. Who can forget about that? At No Mercy in October, and even their last man standing match on Raw in November, I thought is widely forgotten by a lot of people, but I thought also that was a great matchup. So, just another great segment from Michaels and Jericho on this show to kind of take a break from the in-ring action. Up next, we had the ECW Championship matchup with the defending ECW champion Mark Henry taking on the challenger Matt Hardy. The matchup would last all of 30 seconds. I don't know if it was time constraints, whether the segment with Michaels and Jericho had gone on too long, or whether it was the plan from the beginning, I'm not really sure. But Matt Hardy, within the course of 10-15 seconds, would hit the Twist of Fate. But before he can get the pinfall victory, Tony Atlas took Tony Atlas was the manager of Mark Henry at the time, took Matt Hardy out of the ring and started beating him up at ringside, causing the disqualification victory for Matt Hardy. But of course, a title cannot change hands on a disqualification. So Matt Hardy would go over, but he would not claim the championship gold. To kind of even the odds, out would come Matt Hardy's brother, Jeff Hardy, to take out both Tony Atlas, delivering a swanton bomb to Tony Atlas, so credit to him for that, off the apron, and then taking out Mark Henry with a double suplex at ringside. So that was kind of disappointing because they were building up this matchup between Matt Hardy and Mark Henry, if I recall correctly, quite well on the ECW brand. And Matt Hardy, even in 2008, was very much over with the WWE Universe. And a lot of people are very desperate to seeing him win the ECW title on the show. And having Mark Henry go over via pinfall or, cleanly or whatever would have kind of hurt Matt Hardy's credibility as a challenger to the ECW title. But in the long scheme of things, it was smart to prolong Matt Hardy's inevitable ECW victory until Unforgiven the following month. So I thought the matchup itself was disappointing, but in the long run, in the long scheme of things, it did make sense, and it was the right booking decision. Just the way they went about it was a bit disappointing. But I guess it's better to have a 30-second match go to a disqualification as opposed to a 5-minute matchup where the entire matchup would have just seemed as a waste. But even so, though, up next we had CM Punk defending his World Heavyweight Championship against JBL. Now, these two had a very an on and off feud over the course of 2008, over the summer of 2008 for the World Heavyweight Championship. Even the same night that Punk cashed in his Money in the Bank briefcase on June 30th, 2008 on that episode of Raw, that same night he would go on to defend the World Heavyweight Championship successfully against John Bradshaw Layfield. So JBL, as I said in my 2008 Great American Bash review last month, was kind of being groomed for, not for a run with the championship, but to be considered a legitimate threat to the world title. So he had to win the match against John Cena cleanly, might I add, as well, at the Great American Bash pay-per-view. So that would have, had he lost that matchup against Cena, he would not have seemed as big of a threat as he did going into this contest. A lot of people didn't think he would win the world championship anyway, but even so, it helped his cause. So it was a good matchup. It went about 12 minutes. Punk was still, that fighting underdog champion. Up until this point, he had yet to really solidify himself as a star in the company, or at least a legitimate, credible world champion. Because he had defeated Edge, the Money in the Bank briefcase, and, in storyline, it's kind of a cowardly way to cash in, or at least according to, the commentators and stuff. When, in reality, he worked hard to get that briefcase when he won the Money in the Bank ladder match, whatever. So that was kind of a fluky way to win the world title in the first place. He would have that, like I said before, that title defense against JBL, which he would win via interference from John Cena. What else? At the Great American Bash pay-per-view, like I said in my Bash review a couple of weeks ago last month, that matchup ended in a no contest between him and Batista. He would defend again against Batista next night on Raw. Would once again end in a no contest. So this was his real first true title defense as World Heavyweight Champion. Like I said, good match, really nothing off the charts amazing, but both guys worked hard. There was one brutal spot when CM Punk did his, I don't know exactly what you call it, not a drop kick. It's like when he, takes both of his legs, jumps up in the air. It's like Tyler Breeze's finisher, but kind of. So he does it to the face, then he falls backwards. But just this time, their heads collided as Punk was lying on the ground. JBL's head bashed against Punk's. JBL seemed to be fine, but Punk had really got a major gash on his head, and this was when he still had long hair, so you couldn't really see it. But you could see the blood on his hands and in his hair, so that was kind of gruesome. But I commend Punk for continuing on anyway. Was a good matchup, successfully defended the world title via a clean victory over JBL. So it really wasn't. It was a good matchup, a nice, good win for CM Punk, but once again, it was only 3 or 4 weeks later that they would take the title off of Punk without having him even defend it, as he said in his DVD at Unforgiven. Remember, he was taken out via an injury angle earlier on that evening. So this, if I had to take a guess, this matchup with JBL was probably the peak, the climax of his World Heavyweight Championship run. Although that isn't saying much, but it is what it is. I still, to this day, don't understand why they completely botched Punk's first World Championship run. It might have been due to all the star power on Raw at the time, but even so, they could have treated him more than just an underdog of a champion. I mean, they always said during Punk's title defenses that Punk was the underdog instead of the challenger, which it should be the other way around. And he kind of had that going for him, but even so, that the bad booking of CM Punk as champion in 2008 was mind-boggling. But up next, we had Triple H versus the Great Khali for the WWE Championship. So we have our 3 world title matches all in a row on this show. One being 30 seconds, so I don't know if you can really count that one. But our 2 big world title matches on SummerSlam right next to each other, right before the 2 big blockbuster matches between Batista and John Cena and Edge and Undertaker respectively. So that was pretty cool. And it kind of goes to show that the feuds that Edge and Undertaker, and even Batista and Cena for that matter, were bigger than the world titles at that time. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing is really up for debate, but it really goes to show how good and how, how anticipated both those bouts were at the time that they happened. But Triple H and Great Khali for the WWE title. Match on paper, really not all that exciting at all. I mean, considering that Great Khali is involved. But it was really weird, and as I said in my Saturday Night's Main Event review from a couple of days ago, that Great Khali, just for some reason or another, always finds himself in the midst of a push every single summer in the WWE, or at least for the first couple of years. Not anymore, but for the first couple of years. As he debuted, not really in the summer of 06, but he got that major feud with The Undertaker at that point in time. Summer of 07 became the World Heavyweight Champion and feuded with Batista over on SmackDown. Summer of 2008 got this run with Triple H over the WWE title. Would thankfully not win that championship, but he was pushed towards title contention regardless, even though he didn't do anything of note before this. And then in the summer of 2009, he would have that feud with Kane going to SummerSlam as well. So with that being said, the matchup on paper, like I said before, was really nothing special, but they made the most of it. It was better than expected. It was not at all a 5-star classic of a matchup, nor did anyone expect it to be. But Khali being as limited as he is, Triple H got a good match out of him. The whole purpose of this feud, the whole storyline of this feud was that Triple H, leading into SummerSlam, was unable to execute a pedigree on the Great Khali, and he didn't think it was possible. The commentators didn't think it was humanly possible. But that's what this matchup built towards. After a couple of attempts, he would finally hit the pedigree on the Great Khali, get the clean victory. Triple H, you're still your WWE champion. So the matchup, not a great matchup, but for a Great Khali matchup, it was pretty damn good, and probably, arguably, the best Khali matchup in the course of his career, and definitely one of the better Khali matches I've ever seen. So, yeah, definitely better than expected there. Up next, we have Batista and John Cena. So, in terms of the build-up to this matchup, they really build it as the first-time ever contest, as it was Batista and John Cena who both rose to prominence at the very same time, both debuted in 2002, both won their first World Championships at WrestleMania 21, and this was marked as the first ever singles one-on-one encounter between Batista and John Cena. And it was also Batista who threw John Cena out of the 2005 Royal Rumble. It was because of John Cena at the 2008 WWE Draft that Batista was drafted back to Monday nights for the first time in 3 years. So they did a great job of promoting this matchup. Granted, they probably should have began the build for this contest on Raw before it even began. I know they had the subtle teases and stuff like that. But for the most part, the real build-up for this contest did not begin until after the Great American Bash, and I know Cena was kind of wrapped up with JBL, but they really should have begun the official build-up to this matchup at SummerSlam right after Night of Champions. And that's kind of what they do nowadays, and even this year, they had been building towards Punk and Lesnar, Punk and Lesnar last year, Lesnar and Cena this year, Paige and AJ, Jericho and Wyatt, Rollins and Ambrose. They've all been building for the last couple of months, and they finally culminated at SummerSlam, or most feuds anyway. And that's something that they kind of missed a boat on at the time in not starting the Batista and Cena feud earlier, because I think Cena had accidentally knocked out Cena, or maybe it was Cena punched Batista accidentally on an episode of Raw right after the Great American Bash. And then a couple of weeks later, they won the World Tag Team Championships together when they beat the Legacy, or even before the Legacy, they were known as Team Priceless, Cody Rhodes and Ted DiBiase. They would lose said World Tag Team titles the very next week. So that was pretty much the build for Batista versus Cena in a nutshell, which was kind of disappointing, but I was still looking forward to the matchup regardless. I know a lot of people at the time, and I wasn't a full-fledged IWC member or anything, but I can only imagine that people at the time were not looking forward to this contest because it wasn't a mat classic or a technical masterpiece. Neither Batista or Cena are the best mat wrestlers that, in WWE or were at the time. But for what it was, and I've said this countless times over the last couple of years, every single time I watch this matchup, and I've already seen it a couple of times before this, as it was included on Batista's DVD, on his documentary, the first one, not the second one. I thought this matchup was way better than expected. I thought this was a great matchup. Like I said, not a technical masterpiece by any means, but in terms of excitement, in terms of a big fight feel, that's exactly what this matchup had. With it being the first ever singles encounter between the two, Batista going over clean, that awesome powerbomb off the top rope when he caught him and legitimately broke John Cena's neck, and I'll get to that in a second. Just the countless finishers as they hit on one another and the constantly kicking out. I thought this was a great matchup. I was excited. It got me pumped up. I thought this was a way better matchup. Maybe it's just me, but I thought this was a very good matchup for considering the people that were involved in Batista and John Cena. But like I said, Batista scoring the clean victory, and as I said in my Great American Bash review last month, Cena took 3 clean losses in a row to Triple H at Night of Champions, to JBL at the Great American Bash, and then again to Batista at SummerSlam. So major props to John Cena for taking 3 clean losses at SummerSlam. And I still wonder to this day whether the original plan was to have Batista go over in this contest. And I think it was, otherwise he would have, improvised or some bullshit like that. But because, like I said before, when Batista hit that first Batista bomb, when John Cena was going for the leg drop off the top rope, the seated senton, Batista caught him, got him in a Batista powerbomb, slammed into the mat viciously, and broke his neck legitimately. And I'm glad they touched upon that when they feuded again about a year and a half later. But I always wondered whether Cena was intended to go over, and I guess not, because Batista seemed like really nothing went wrong. And maybe he was supposed to get a few more minutes than it did. It only went 14 minutes. Maybe it was supposed to go longer. But Batista going over clean, regardless of whether Cena was hurt or not, I thought was a big accomplishment. And I think the original plan was to have Batista and Cena faced off at WrestleMania 25, if I recall correctly, for the WWE title in a rematch, which I thought could have been great. But Batista had gotten injured in December of 2008, and he didn't actually end up returning until the night after WrestleMania 25. But that being said, though, they did end up reigniting that rivalry going into WrestleMania 26 over the WWE title right before Batista had left the company, so I thought that was pretty cool. And I enjoyed that feud. I enjoyed that WrestleMania matchup. And these two do have good chemistry together. I never really enjoyed their the I Quit match that they had at Over the Limit a couple of years ago in 2010, I want to say. But every other matchup, the Last Man Standing match, the WrestleMania match, and especially this contest, I really, really enjoyed. So good work from Batista and Cena. And it was really weird because John Cena, reportedly broke his matchup in this, broke his neck in this matchup. But yet the very next night, he would have a handicap matchup of all matches against Team Priceless. He would face Rhodes and DiBiase, and he would beat them. He would have he did the double attitude adjustment, or the double FU as it was called at the time, and he showed no signs of ring rust whatsoever, no signs of being injured. And then it wasn't until the next week that they announced that Cena was going to be out with the injury. So he didn't really show any signs of pain. He did at the end of SummerSlam. He was having He was having trouble getting up. I almost said hard trouble. He was hard. Anyway, he was having difficulty getting up after his matchup with Batista concluded. But yet, the very next night, he seemed like he was completely fine, ready to go into Unforgiven for the World Heavyweight Championship in that scramble matchup, if you recall that. And then the next week, they announced that he was injured. So I always thought that was weird. But anyway, though, good work from Batista and John Cena in this contest. Up next, the main event, The Undertaker taking on Edge, Hell in a Cell matchup. So, like I said with Jericho and Shawn Michaels, I thought this was a stellar feud and by far one of my favorite feuds of all time. Right up there with Michaels and Jericho and Orton and Christian from a couple of years ago. I thought Edge and Undertaker consistently, and this was a very consistent feud. They first started it when Edge cashed in that Money in the Bank briefcase in May of 2007 on The Undertaker to win his first World Heavyweight Championship. And they would continue on feuding for the remainder of 2007. Edge would cost The Undertaker the world title at Survivor Series. He would win back the world title at Armageddon. They kind of took a break from it for a while, and then they got back into it around for WrestleMania time. They had a series of great matches of the world title at WrestleMania, Backlash, Judgment Day, and One Night Stand, which I did review here on the channel a couple of months ago if you want to check it out, leading to this matchup at SummerSlam in Hell in a Cell, with Undertaker being reinstated, his first appearance on WWE TV for over 2.5 months. So that made this matchup that much more memorable because it was Undertaker's first appearance in quite a while. So this matchup I thoroughly enjoyed. I've gone on the record and said in the past that this was by far my favorite Hell in a Cell matchup of all time. And don't say, oh, you've only been watching since 2008 and you've only seen all the shitty ones in the last 6 years. That's not the case whatsoever. I own the Best of Hell in a Cell DVD that came out a couple of years ago. Every matchup on it, every Hell in a Cell contest in WWE history. And I've seen every single Hell in a Cell match that has ever occurred, and I thought this was by far my favorite. And it wasn't even on the DVD. This one wasn't on the DVD. But I thought this matchup was absolutely stellar. These guys did a great job in terms of entertaining in-ring action, solid storytelling, just everything about this contest. It was innovative. Edge speared The Undertaker through the cell wall. And it was funny, too, because my friend John and I, at HeelByDesign on Twitter, we were talking about only weeks before this, and my computer went out. I need the light for my, whatever, for the video. That's why it's kind of darker than it was before. Anyway, we were kind of talking about right before this that, we were talking about only weeks before this that Edge was supposed to, or we were thinking that maybe Edge would spear The Undertaker off the top of the Hell in a Cell. Not even physically possible. He'd probably kill him. Anyway, though, we were talking about how it was a possibility, or in our minds at the time, that Edge could possibly spear The Undertaker off the Hell in a Cell and grant him the victory. But with that being said, though, that would not end up happening. And only a couple of weeks ago, actually, Edge was on Talk Is Jericho talking about this contest and saying that he and Undertaker had kind of petitioned to go on top of the cell and have Edge take a tombstone on the top of the cell, much like with Jericho and Triple H back from 2002 when they had their vicious Hell in the Cell contest. Edge and Undertaker wanted to do something similar, but they were told no because the WWE went PG only a couple weeks before this matchup took place. They had just gone PG, so they couldn't do it. There wasn't going to be any blood, so I don't really see what the point of, disallowing them from going on top was, but never mind. So, even that aside, though, I thought this was a great contest. Maybe just going on top of the cell would have made this even a better matchup than it was, but even that's saying quite a bit because this was easily the best Hell in a Cell match I've personally ever seen. Storytelling, the in-ring action, everything about this contest I thought was stellar. Both guys were excellent. Undertaker spearing Edge, taking his own finisher. Edge, the best part about this contest, the absolute best part about this contest, were the drawbacks. The drawbacks to everything these two have done over the last year and a half before this matchup took place. Undertaker, towards the end of the contest, to finish off Edge, took the camera from the cameraman, hit Edge over the head with it. And the reason why that was so significant, and maybe not to some fans at the time, certainly not to me, but after watching their Hell in a Cell matchup from Survivor Series of 2007 between Batista and The Undertaker, it was Edge who disguised himself as a cameraman to hit Edge with, to hit Batista, no, to hit The Undertaker with the camera to cost him the World Heavyweight Championship. So that was a very significant spot for Undertaker to gain his vengeance over Edge, to hit him with the camera, the same camera that he was attacked with many months earlier. He also hit Edge with a concerto, a maneuver that Edge had used multiple times going into this contest on his family members, Chavo Guerrero, and the rest of the La Familia stable, as well as The Undertaker going into WrestleMania and their feud in the spring of 2008. So those are some great touches that the commentators touched upon, specifically Jim Ross, and I think the other commentator was Taz, because Mick Foley had just gotten off of commentary. He was en route to TNA at the time. But anyway, though, I thought this matchup was phenomenal. Undertaker went over, going up the ramp, getting ready to leave the building, looks back, goes back into the ring, sets up a... Did he set up a table? I'm not exactly sure. I think he did. I'm not exactly sure if he did or not. But anyway, I do know that he took Edge up the ladder, chokeslammed him right through the ring mat, sending him to quote-unquote hell. And at the time, I thought it was great. But, I mean, looking back now, it's kind of cheesy. But even still, I thought that was really cool to write Edge off of television for the next 3 months or so. So, anyway, I thought that was a great matchup. A great way to close off the show. And probably the best main event matchup that could have gone with, because it was far and away the best matchup on this show. So, overall, I thought this was a great SummerSlam from top to bottom. MVP and Hardy, very good matchup, very good way to kick off the show. 2 title changes with Glamorella taking home the Women's and Intercontinental Championships. Matt Hardy and Mark Henry, say what you will about it, but it kept the feud going. It prolonged that moment with Matt Hardy winning the ECW Championship. CM Punk and JBL, a good solid matchup. Triple H and Great Khali, better than expected contest. Batista and Cena, a very, very good matchup in my opinion. Much better than a lot of people thought it would be in terms of a big fight feel. And The Undertaker and Edge having a stellar Hell in a Cell matchup. And in my opinion, my favorite Hell in a Cell matchup of all time. And if not one of the best Hell in a Cell matches of all time, that goes, with some debate with some people. You can argue about that one. But I personally think it was one of the best Hell in a Cell matches of all time because it concluded one of the best feuds in recent WWE history. So, with that being said, I thought overall I really enjoyed this SummerSlam, and not only because it brought back memories of a lot of the stuff that I grew up on watching while watching wrestling 6 years ago when I first got into it, but just because of the wrestling, the smart booking decisions, and a lot of the furthering of storylines and stuff like that. So I really enjoyed this event. I thought it was great. What would I rate this out of? maybe like an 8 out of 10. I think there could have been some things better, like the world title matches could have been better, but they were pretty good for what they were, which is saying a lot considering, Great Khali and JBL were involved. But yeah, I would absolutely recommend this to people to check out, regardless of whether you watched during that year or not, like me. Even still, I thought this was a stellar SummerSlam, highly underrated. I think it's a lot better than some people give it credit for. Definitely one of the better SummerSlams. Definitely one of the best SummerSlams in recent memory. But I think one of the best SummerSlams of all time. Maybe in my top 5. I got to watch all of them to really back that up. But yeah, great SummerSlam. Definitely check it out when you get the chance on the WWE Network. As I said earlier on in the video, I will be reviewing my 2011 and 2013. My reviews of both those installments of SummerSlam will be up here on the channel. The next one, 2011, will be probably on this upcoming Tuesday. And then the 2013 one will probably be up next Saturday, kind of ending August with my SummerSlam reviews from recent years. And then, like I said before, going to September, I'll probably be reviewing Night of Champions for sure, maybe some Unforgiven events thrown in there, depending on what my school schedule is when I get back, my class schedule and all that kind of stuff. So, with that being said, thanks very much for watching. I always appreciate it. If you want to support the show, support me, support the channel, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And be sure to check back next week with my review with the 2011 installment of SummerSlam, personally one of my favorite SummerSlams of all time. You don't want to miss that. So check back then. Thanks for watching, folks, and I'll catch you then.